You are not lazy. You see the task, you want to do it, you know exactly how, and still you cannot begin. That is not a willpower problem. That is called ADHD paralysis, and it is one of the most misunderstood experiences in all of modern neuroscience. Somewhere between the moment your brain says I should start this and the moment your body actually moves, there is a break, like a severed wire inside a circuit, a gap between intention and action that no amount of just do it can ever close. And by the end of this video, you will understand the one thing that neuroscience has discovered actually reconnects that wire. And I promise you, it is not what you have been trying. Not willpower, not discipline. Most people who live with this spend their entire lives convinced they have a character flaw. If you stay until the final minute, you will finally have a name for what is actually happening inside your brain, and a completely different way to understand yourself. In the next few minutes, we are going to explore why the prefrontal cortex literally cannot generate the go signal in ADHD, why the gap between intention and action is neurological rather than moral, and what the research actually shows about getting unstuck. This is not a motivational speech. It is an explanation, and you deserve one. Not procrastination. Let us start with the most important distinction you will ever hear about this condition. ADHD paralysis is not procrastination. They look identical from the outside. Person sitting still, not doing what they are supposed to do, but the internal experience is entirely different. Procrastination is a choice. It is avoidance. The person could start if they genuinely decided to. They are choosing not to, even if that choice is unconscious or habitual. ADHD paralysis is not a choice. Frozen. The person wants desperately to start. They may be sitting at their desk, staring directly at the task, internally screaming at themselves to move, and nothing happens. Russell Barkley, one of the world's leading ADHD researchers, describes this as a fundamental failure of self-regulation. It is not that the person does not care. It is that the brain's executive control system, the part that translates intention into action, is not functioning correctly. ADHD is not a knowledge problem. It is a performance problem. You know what to do, you just cannot make yourself do it. And that difference between knowing and doing is everything. Here is what makes this even stranger. The same person who cannot start a simple email can sometimes spend 6 hours hyper-focused on something that genuinely interests them. Why? The answer reveals something disturbing about how the ADHD brain actually generates the signal to begin. Your frozen brain. Now, what I am about to explain sounds almost too simple, but the implications are enormous. The region of the brain most responsible for ADHD paralysis is the prefrontal cortex. This is the executive center, the brain's CEO. It handles prioritization, planning, sequencing, and most critically, task initiation. It is the part that decides what to do next and sends the signal to begin. In people with ADHD, this region is consistently underactivated, not structurally broken. Underactivated. Neuroimaging studies have shown that when someone with ADHD tries to initiate a non-preferred task, the prefrontal cortex simply does not fire with the same intensity as it does in a neurotypical brain. The command to start never fully arrives. The signal is weak, attenuated, like trying to start a car engine with a nearly dead battery. The mechanics are there, the fuel is there, the driver wants to go, but the engine will not turn over, and this is not a metaphor. This is literally what brain imaging shows happening in the neural circuitry. Brain sends no signal. Dopamine plays a critical role here. In the ADHD brain, the dopamine system, which is essential for motivation, reward prediction, and task initiation, operates differently, far more differently than most people realize. And if you believe that motivation is simply a matter of deciding to care, what comes next will fundamentally challenge that assumption. The go signal. Here is where this becomes deeply important. The ADHD brain does not lack dopamine in the way that was once believed. What it lacks is efficient dopamine signaling for motivation and task initiation. Specifically, the dopamine reward pathways that are supposed to activate when you anticipate completing a task. Those pathways are under-responsive in ADHD. In a neurotypical brain, thinking about a future reward, finishing a project, checking something off a list, triggers a small but real dopamine release that generates just enough motivational energy to begin. In the ADHD brain, that anticipatory dopamine response is blunted. The brain cannot generate sufficient activation from future rewards alone. It is not wired for delayed gratification in the same way. This is why a person with ADHD can hyper-focus for hours on a video game, but cannot begin a work task they know is important. The game provides immediate, continuous dopamine stimulation. The work task does not. It is not laziness. It is neurochemistry. If this understanding is shifting something for you, if you are starting to see your own patterns through a different lens. Hit like and subscribe to keep exploring the depths of your psyche with me. There is so much more we need to uncover, because this dopamine problem interacts with something called the intention-action gap, and understanding it is about to reframe everything you thought you knew about your own motivation. Intention vs action. Stop and think about this for a second. You have had the experience of deciding, fully, genuinely deciding, to do something and then not doing it, not because you changed your mind, not because something came up, just because the gap between deciding and starting felt impossible to cross. This is the intention-action gap, and for people with ADHD, it is not a minor inconvenience, it is a chasm. Psychologists distinguish between two separate systems in the brain: the declarative system, which holds our intentions, plans, and goals, the I know what I should do brain, and the procedural system, which actually executes behavior, the I am doing it brain. In neurotypical people, these two systems communicate reasonably well. A strong intention generally produces initiated action. In ADHD, the bridge between knowing and doing is structurally weaker. You can have the clearest, most sincere intention to begin, and the procedural system simply does not receive the message with enough force to activate. Piers Steele, a researcher who has studied motivation extensively, describes this as a temporal motivation failure, an inability to make future consequences feel sufficiently real in the present moment to generate action. In ADHD, this failure is not a habit. It is not a mindset issue. It is wired in at a neurological level. No, it can't start. And what happens next, when this pattern repeats itself day after day, is where things get truly painful. Task initiation trap. Now forget everything I just said for a moment, not because it was wrong, but because there is another layer underneath it that makes everything dramatically worse. Imagine you have 10 things you need to do. A neurotypical brain might feel mild stress about this. The ADHD brain experiences something categorically different, because executive dysfunction does not just affect task initiation, it cripples prioritization. The very part of your brain that is supposed to look at 10 tasks and identify which one to begin is the same part already struggling to function. So instead of selecting one task and starting, the ADHD brain gets caught in a loop, analyzing all 10, feeling overwhelmed by all 10, initiating none. 10 tasks, 10 paralysis points, 0 movement. ADHD researcher Ned Hallowell calls this a traffic jam of the frontal lobes. Every task feels equally urgent and equally impossible to begin. The brain cannot sequence them, cannot rank them, and the more important the task, the more paralyzing it often becomes. Because the stakes feel higher, the emotional weight is greater, and the dopamine signal needed to overcome that weight simply is not there. The ADHD brain does not refuse to work. It refuses to start anything it cannot feel. This is why people with ADHD often appear disorganized or avoidant when they are actually neither. They are stuck at the starting line, watching everyone else run, but here is where the story takes an even darker turn. Emotion overload. What I am about to tell you sounds impossible, but it has been demonstrated repeatedly in research. Emotional dysregulation may be the single most underrecognized component of ADHD, and it is directly connected to paralysis. When most people think of ADHD, they think of attention, of restlessness, of disorganization. But there is a deeply emotional dimension to this condition that rarely gets discussed openly. People with ADHD experience emotions more intensely than neurotypical people, and they have a significantly harder time regulating those emotions once they arrive. Bigger feelings, less regulation. This matters for paralysis because when emotional intensity collides with an already difficult task, a task you are afraid of failing at, or one that carries years of accumulated shame, the emotional signal amplifies the executive dysfunction. The task no longer just feels difficult, it feels threatening. Your nervous system begins to respond as though starting this task is genuinely dangerous, and your brain, trying to protect you, generates a freeze response. It is the same mechanism as a deer in headlights, not laziness, not avoidance. A primal freeze driven by emotional overwhelm hitting a system that already struggles to initiate. ADHD paralysis is often fear wearing the perfect mask of laziness. And what happens when this freeze repeats itself day after day, year after year, is one of the most devastating consequences of living with unrecognized ADHD. What comes next is the part most people never talk about: the shame spiral. Let me pause here because this next part changes the entire picture. The shame spiral is not a side effect of ADHD paralysis. It is a force multiplier. Here is how it works. The person with ADHD cannot initiate a task. They sit there, acutely aware they cannot start, watching the time pass, watching their responsibilities accumulate. And because they live in a world that insists this is a choice, that this is laziness, that they just need to try harder, they begin to internalize that message. They start telling it to themselves. As Brené Brown once observed, shame is the most powerful master emotion. It is the fear that we are not good enough. That shame then becomes its own source of emotional weight layered directly on top of the task. Now starting means confronting not just the task itself, but the evidence of your failure to start it sooner. The shame becomes part of the obstacle, and because shame generates intense emotional activation, which, as we just explored, makes executive function measurably harder, the paralysis deepens. The ADHD brain, trying harder under increasing emotional load, becomes less capable of initiating, not more. The harder you force yourself through shame, the more frozen you become. This is why harsh self-criticism is neurologically counterproductive for ADHD. Shame and executive activation are incompatible at a biological level. Shame blocks the signal. This spiral compounds over years, and it leads directly to why willpower was always the wrong tool entirely. Why willpower fails. But here is what nobody ever tells you about willpower and ADHD, and this is backed by decades of research. Willpower is itself a prefrontal cortex function. It requires executive resources to deploy, and here is the cruel irony at the heart of ADHD paralysis. The very cognitive tool you reach for when you tell yourself, I just need to push through, willpower, depends on the exact same neural infrastructure that ADHD has already compromised. Using executive dysfunction to fight executive dysfunction. It is like trying to lift yourself off the ground by pulling on your own shoulders. The mechanism you are deploying to solve the problem is the problem. Roy Baumeister's research on ego depletion demonstrated that willpower is a finite resource that depletes with use. In neurotypical people, for someone with ADHD, that battery starts closer to empty. The advice, just try harder, given to someone experiencing an executive circuit failure, is not just unhelpful, it is actively harmful. It consumes the few executive resources available without addressing the underlying dopamine signaling problem. More effort through the wrong mechanism only deepens the paralysis. Every time a person with ADHD reaches for willpower and fails, it confirms another internal story, that they are broken, that they are inadequate. Wrong tool, wrong solution. And yet there is a completely different approach, one neuroscience actually supports. But what comes first is the revelation that finally explains everything I have been building toward. The one thing I promised you at the very start of this video. Locked in your body. This is the moment I need you to truly stop and absorb what I am about to say. Because this is the resolution to everything we have been building toward, and it may be the most important thing you have ever understood about your own brain. When ADHD paralysis is at its worst, when you are sitting there desperately wanting to begin, knowing exactly what needs to be done, completely unable to initiate, you are not weak, you are not broken. Locked. You are experiencing what researchers now describe as a near-complete disconnection between the brain's intention centers and its motor initiation systems. The prefrontal cortex is formulating the goal. The motor system is ready to execute. But the dopamine-mediated signal pathway between them is not firing with sufficient strength to bridge the gap. It is like being locked inside your own body while your brain refuses to issue the go signal. And when people with ADHD describe feeling trapped, frozen, unable to make themselves move, they are not being dramatic. They are describing a real, measurable neurological phenomenon. The ADHD brain is not an unwilling brain. It is an unable brain. This is exactly what I promised you at the start. Not laziness, not weakness, a broken signal between intention and action. If you know someone who has spent their life being called lazy when they were actually experiencing this, send this to them right now. They deserve to finally understand what has been happening. Comment locked or free, which one has been your reality. The real unlock. Now that you understand what you are actually dealing with, let us talk about what research shows actually works. Because if ADHD paralysis is caused by insufficient dopamine activation in the initiation pathway, the solution is not more willpower. It is dopamine activation through a completely different door. Russell Barkley and other researchers have identified the conditions under which the ADHD brain generates enough dopamine to cross the initiation threshold. And it is not future rewards, not discipline, not trying harder. It is for specific conditions: novelty, urgency, challenge, and interest. 1. Novelty. Make the task new or different in some way. 2. Urgency. Create a real external time constraint. 3. Challenge. Slightly raise the difficulty of the task. 4. Interest. Connect the work to genuine curiosity. Body doubling. Working in the physical or virtual presence of another person. Activates social dopamine circuits that can bypass the initiation failure entirely. External accountability creates the urgency signal the brain needs. Breaking a task into its smallest possible first step lowers the activation energy required to begin. You do not need more motivation. You need a different ignition system. The wire between intention and action is not permanently severed. It can be reconnected, but it requires the right kind of current, not shame, not willpower. Novelty, urgency, interest, challenge. New tools, new outcomes. Understanding your brain is not an excuse. It is the beginning of a completely different relationship with yourself. Everything we have explored in this video points to one essential truth. ADHD paralysis is not a failure of character. It is not laziness wearing an elaborate costume. It is a neurological experience. The experience of being cut off from your own ability to begin, despite wanting to start, despite knowing how, despite genuinely caring. As Socrates once urged, know thyself. That ancient instruction has never been more literal than right now. Because when you truly understand what is happening in your brain, when you stop fighting yourself with the wrong tools, you can build systems that actually work with your neurology instead of against it. The shame accumulated over a lifetime of being told to just try harder. It was built on a fundamental misunderstanding. You were never lazy. You were always locked. And now you have something you did not have before. The right map, the right understanding. Self-knowledge is always the first step toward real change. If you made it to the end of this video, comment "Go Signal Found," because that is exactly what you have just discovered. A new way of seeing your own mind, and that is where transformation always begins. Welcome to the Psyche Project. If this gave you something to think about, subscribe for more.